This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 10, Episode 1. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network, brought to you by HK. Today is Friday, April 19th, 2024, as of the recording of this episode, and glad to be with you all. I am your host, Riley Bowman, and joined today by co-host and producer, Doc McLaughlin.
Thank you for having me.
We are remote today from each other. He's not here in the shop with me. We've done several in a row in the shop or in the office here together, but glad we could make this happen with you in your uber secure secret location.
My lair.
Your lair. Today's episode, we're bringing to you our fourth installment of our Uncensored Beginner's Guide to Training. And we're calling this one The Drills, or as Doc likes to call it, the drills and the skills. So we're going to talk about what and how to actually train, including maybe some drills and different exercises and things that you can or should be doing, and how to go about that. So I look forward to diving into that topic with you today, Brian. But first, today's episode is sponsored by CCW Safe, which is our choice for self-defense legal coverage. You should consider having them back you up like they back me up. Go over to ccwsafe.com and learn more about their various programs. The ultimate plan, I think, is definitely the way to go for the ultimate in coverage, but also they do have some plans specifically for first responders, which is known as the Protectors Plan, and also the Defenders Plan, which is a little bit more of a cost-conscious option as well for regular Joe Schmoes and Janes out there. So check it out, ccwsafe.com. Guardian Nation members, by the way, save even more, or save 20% actually, discount Guardian Nation members receive. So definitely check that out and consider Guardian Nation membership so you can save 20%. Also, today's episode sponsored by Heckler & Koch, or HK, as is easier pronounced and said. We're proud to have them on board as part of the Concealed Carry Podcast. HK-USA.com is the website to check out their full lineup of products. We definitely encourage you to stop in your local gun store, gun shop, whatever, and check out any of the HK pistols or other firearms. I've been personally carrying on a daily basis now for some time, the VP9SK with a Hollow Sun SCS red dot on it, actually green dot in this case, and I've been really digging it, really loving it. Something I'm really impressed with that they did with the VP9SK extended mag. You get the 15-round magazine, and it's nicely rounded, and it's contoured roundedly. So it conceals really well, even though it's a 15-round capacity gun. It's like a little bit smaller than a Glock 19, but it conceals better than a Glock 19. And then if I stick the 12-round mag in that thing, it just totally disappears no matter what I wear. Very, very compact concealed carry option, the VP9SK. And I've been shooting competitively the VP9L and VP9 Match, and they've just been awesome to shoot and work with. So, and just because I'm talking about it, Gray Guns did some trigger work for me on my VP9s, and it's fabulous. So they're not a sponsor of the podcast, but I'm wearing their hat today, and worth mentioning, I suppose, since people sometimes like to know about that kind of stuff. Anyway, check out our sponsors, ccwsafe.com and hk-usa.com. Your support of them supports us and makes what we do possible. Let's get into it, Brian, without further ado. Let's talk about drills, or more specifically, how and what to practice, how and what to develop skill. And drills are a part of that, but they're not the only thing for that, and they're not the end all be all either. I think is probably the first thing I'll just mention. So let's explore this. What's your first thoughts on the subject?
First thoughts are, let's get a definition of what a drill is and how that applies to our training. I think, I think there's a lot of things that people could be saying, especially out on the internet, a lot of YouTube videos and different things, and different training mechanisms and different drills and things that you can be doing. But what does that mean to drill? If somebody's just starting out with training, What does that mean to go out and do a drill or do a series of drills, and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, so I'll kind of run by you a couple of definitions, and you can tell me what you think of these. When I hear drill, as in like a shooting drill, I think of something that is well defined in terms of you're going to do X thing at Y distance for Z number of rounds. And so, like an example would be like let's go to a classic example. Actually, I'll give you two classic examples. One would be what's known as Mozambique, or two to the body, one to the head, or a failure to stop drill is another term for that. And so that's typically done. My understanding, at least to how I've done this before in the past, was a 3-yard drill, and you're going to use typically you could use like a USPSA target. You could use the alpha zone for the body, and it's a little bit bigger than a credit card, but it's about a credit card sized box for the head shot.
Hmm.
Or you could use an IDPA target, which has got an 8-inch zone in the center chest and a 4-inch circle for the head shot, something like that. And so you would, at 3 yards, draw and fire 2 to the body target zone, and then follow that up immediately with 1 to the head target zone. So it's 3 yards on a specified target for a certain number of rounds, and then you take the time of that. And so like I remember I did what's called the Vice Card Challenge a couple years ago, which was kind of this big to do thing where if you accomplished it in under 1.38 seconds, then you got a Vice card. As it was a patch, a special patch, a limited edition patch, which I achieved. That's pretty spicy. You draw and you put 2 into the body, 1 to the head in 1.38 seconds or less.
Okay, so
Uh,
there's some glory to be earned out there by how quickly you can accomplish some of these drills.
sure,
Yeah,
yes,
I
yeah.
mean some notoriety, to be honest. I mean, if you're able to win that patch, I mean that's kind of cool.
Well,
An
yeah,
achievement to shoot for.
yeah. As our friend Brian Eastridge, he would refer to something like that as chasing range Pokemon. Like which kind of
That's
gives
kind
a
of
negative
cool.
connotation.
I
Uh,
think it's
but
cool.
I don't have a problem with that kind of stuff. I went after that Vice Card challenge because it was in the winter. I was bored. I was like, let's just start some of these shooting challenges and kind of see what happens. And
Yeah.
so that wasn't the only one I did. I did like the Tier 1 concealed 3.7s drill and got their little challenge coin as part of that. I feel like I did one other. I don't remember exactly what that was now, but so I mean, that's just one example of like that's a drill for sure. Like it's a specified target, distance, number of rounds, prescribed, order of engagement, if you will, or how it's shot. Another classic example of drill would be like El Presidente, which is done at 10 yards, typically done on a USPSA target, or you could use an IDPA target as well, your choice there. Just so people know, like USPSA A zones and the IDPA down zero, 8-inch down zero zone, they're like the same surface area. They're just that surface area is spread out differently. In the case of an IDPA target, it's a circle. In the case of a USPSA target, it's 6 inches wide and 11-inch tall rectangle. But they're the same surface area. I think the USPSA A zone is more forgiving as far as like recoil management, up down, since that's like the primary, bias, if you will, when you're running things fast. But anyway, I don't get too worked up about this or that as far as those targets. You use what you want to use. 10 yards, you start facing uprange, meaning away from the targets. You turn around, you put 2 rounds into each of 3 targets that are spaced 1 yard apart. So you got 3 targets at 10 yards, and they got 3 feet in between them. So you turn around, put 2 into each, and then you conduct a reload. Typically, it's done from slide lock, but I've also seen it done not from slide lock. And then you do the reload, and then you shoot each of the 3 targets 2 more times. Okay, so again, 10 yards. There's a prescribed like shooting course as far as you shoot certain number of rounds in a certain order, or you got to do certain things procedurally, like such as doing the reload in between. So those are drills to me. They're very well defined with a clear, I guess, objective. The objective being like do the drill thing in this manner, and when you're done, record hits and time. Like, did you get all the hits, and what was the time to do that? Some approaches would be you could assign for every hit outside of the intended target area, you then maybe give a time penalty to, or some people might just look at that and go, you know what, if you have any misses, it's a fail. So kind of depending on what your approach there is, and I think there's valid approaches across the board there. So those are drills. And so I would define a drill as something that is very well defined, has a clear objective, that it has a specific course of fire to it. Um, I mentioned that to kind of contrast it now with I talk about drills, I do drills, I teach drills or use them in classes I teach, but then I also have things that I refer to as exercises. And I call them exercises as opposed to drills because they're not as well defined. There's not necessarily a clear course of fire involved. And the objective might not necessarily be like purely looking for hits within a given amount of time, but the objective might be something like, as you fire these next however many rounds, your objective is to pay attention to what the sights of your gun are doing. Okay. And
Hmm.
so it's an exercise. There's not a clear um, objective in hits and time. It's more what's the word, esoteric maybe,
Hmm.
where it's like we're trying to get something out of this, but it's not as clear cut. A lot of times those kind of exercises are more exploratory or experimental in nature. Like and I do this quite a bit in my pistol intelligence class, where I have students do certain exercises, and it's all about the exploration or the experimentation of various techniques, and then sort of observing the process as it's happening to see, like, does this work better or does that work better?
Hmm.
And so those
Okay.
are exercises, not drills. So does that make sense? Kind of like two different, um, I guess, approach. Like, and they're both valid, and they're both essential to training, to practice. But they kind of there's there's drills and there's exercises. I guess what I'm trying to explain. What do you think of all that? Looks like we may have had some connectivity issues here because Brian is frozen on my end. I don't know if that's just me or him, or see if it clears up. My apologies to those of you watching live. Yeah, not sure quite what's going on with. Hello, guy watching. Yes, from the home of the Guardian Conference. Fantastic. Hope to see you there again, Guy. As always, Eddie, howdy, welcome, sir. So we'll just talk with a few of you and recognize those of you that are joining us live. Really good to hear from y'all. See if we get Brian back. Let's see who else we got watching today. Feel free to chime in. Let us know where you're watching from, and leave us a hello, or even ask a question if you have a question for me or for us. Anybody else? It's quiet out there. I have no problem carrying on the show with by myself. However, I did throw it at him for his feedback on what I had to say. I've talked plenty already. Oh, let's see. Technology isn't it wonderful? Appreciate you all for being patient. I'm sure we'll get him back here momentarily. While we're just shooting the breeze, I'm just going to mention a little bit of self promotion, I suppose, but why not? Um, I thought I would just mention some upcoming things schedule wise for me, for training opportunities. If you'd like to jump in a class with me, um, so a couple things coming up: June 21st and 20 through the 23rd. I'm going to be in Centerton, Arkansas. It's near Bentonville, Arkansas, doing a 2-day pistol intelligence course, as well as combining that with a match. So I'll be shooting an IDPA match, and I'll be coaching students through that match as part of that training weekend. So that would be a great time. Would love to see folks sign up for that. It's really 3 days worth of training, in Centerton, Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas, hosted at the Lonesome Oak Guns and Range. So relatively new on the website, actually. This is recently posted. Brian just messaged me saying he lost his internet. That's unfortunate. Hopefully it gets restored. All right, what else? July 20th and 21st, I'm going to be in Conroe, Texas, teaching a 2-day match performance skills class. This is the first time for this particular curriculum for this class. This was actually at their request to do a match performance oriented class. So looking forward to doing that. That's hosted at BTO Range in Conroe, Texas. So maybe you'll see some of you there. Eddie, watching from California, Conceal Carry Podcast has really helped me in my EDC life. Eddie, man, that warms my heart, man. Thanks. That's awesome. That's why we do what we do. At least that's one of the reasons why we do what we do. I actually got a really cool email from a listener recently, and if they're listening, I want you to know I did see that. I haven't responded to it yet, but I really appreciate it. Basically, they were just expressing their gratitude for the podcast and for all that they've learned from it. It's helped them as well, and so that stuff just makes me just. There's nothing that makes me happier than getting emails like that from you guys. Later in the year, so I talked about the Conroe, Texas one. So later in the year in Yadkinville, North Carolina, hosted at the Apache Solutions range. Apache Solutions, by the way, a great cadre of fabulous instructors out there in North Carolina. Tim Kelly and his crew, they're hosting me for 2 days of pistol intelligence, October 19th and 20th. And then the next weekend, I'll be in Pennsylvania doing a 2-day pistol intelligence class as well as a coached match. So 3-day weekend training event. If not that everyone has to participate in the coached match portion of the class, but you're welcome to, and it's a great opportunity to learn and to apply the things we are learning in pistol intelligence. Not that what we learn in pistol intelligence only applies to competition and matches. Far from it, in fact, but the match is a great setting to put that stuff into practice in a fairly high-paced, stressful environment. So, looking forward to that one. That's October 25th, 26th in Southeast Pennsylvania. So we actually had to change the range on that one, and I need to get that updated on the website. That has been moved to, what's the range name? I'll see if I can look that up. And then it is December 14th, 15th in Spokane, Washington. I'll be doing a 2-day pistol intelligence class there as well. So, folks, you can go to rileybowman.com and see my schedule of training events and courses. That's not to include the Guardian Conference in September that Guy so kindly pointed out in the comments. That's because that's where he's from, is in the Oklahoma City area, which is where the 2024 Guardian Conference is at. So that's September 20th to 22nd. We still have tickets available. We're actually pacing ahead of where we have in years past as far as ticket sales. So is it possible that fills up and sells out? It's possible, but as of right now, we definitely have tickets available for the Guardian Conference. You can sign up for that one. You'll see it on my schedule as well as a link on rileybowman.com, but at guardianconference.com if you want to go directly to that event website. Also teaching at the Active Self-Protection National Conference in the second weekend of September, whereas the Guardian Conference, or maybe it's the first weekend of September. I think it's actually the first weekend of September, something like that. Anyway, whereas the Guardian Conference, I think, is the third weekend of September. And then also teaching at a Girl in a Gun National Conference next week. In fact, I know that I may see some of you there as well, some of you ladies. So anyway, folks, I thought I'd take a moment there. Still looks like we're working on getting Brian back. Appreciate your patience. If I don't hear from, if he doesn't get here soon, I'll go ahead and just carry on with the episode. But yeah, hope to see some of you training with me later in this year. I do like 6 classes a year on the road. So that's about all the capacity that I have of my current schedule. So, try to hit a couple of areas in the country. So we got Texas and Spokane, Washington, and we've got North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Arkansas. I may set up a class here more local to me in Colorado, maybe April or August timeframe. Still working on that potentially, but So I just try to hit some different corners and parts of the country. Able to do that about 6 times a year. So not a lot of opportunity, but definitely do hope that there's something that's close to you that you're able to come and spend the weekend with me on the range and learn how to see better, shoot better, make better decisions, understand what your gun is doing better, because understanding all those things will help you level up your shooting performance and your shooting skill. So, still work on getting Brian back, but I'm going to go ahead and pick up and continue on as best I can by myself right now. So, I explained my perspective on drills versus exercises, and the reason I explained that is because a lot of times I think some shooters have the idea that going to the range and practicing or training is kind of goes like this. It's like, okay, I'm going to go to the range today. I'm going to go with 2 boxes of ammo. I got 100 rounds, let's say. Although my range sessions are usually more like 250 to 300 rounds, but whatever it is that you've budgeted for your first session. So you'll go and you'll be like, okay, I'm going to start off by, I'm going to warm up with a 10-10-10 drill, let's just say. Okay, what is that? Well, that's 10 rounds at 10 yards in 10 seconds, shot on a NRA B8 target, and you're shooting it for score. Okay, so all right, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do another drill, and then I'm going to do another drill, and then I'm going to do this other drill, and then I'll do that other drill, or maybe I'll repeat some of the drills I've already done, and then they'll call that a day and be like, okay, cool, there's my practice session. Now, that's not necessarily a bad practice session because those drills have meaning and those drills help you focus on certain aspects of shooting and certain shooting skills. But is that the only way to train and practice? No. Is it the most effective way to train and practice? Depends. So I believe that's a very limited view of training or of practice is just going to the range and shooting some number of prescribed drills, and then and maybe you're gathering the data from those, which is good, like you should be doing that, and then basically calling that a day. Well, that's fine, but think sometimes you have to realize that shooting the drills is kind of like a test or a quiz, and that there's other things that we should be doing that sort of help prepare us for that test or quiz. Okay. And that's where I think shooting exercises come into play. Just like, when we do, um, when we are doing physical fitness related things, like there's exercises we do specifically with the purpose of building strength, of of strengthening the body, the joints, all of that, so that we're preparing ourselves for something. Whether that's maybe you're actually preparing for a sport type event, right? You would do exercises to strengthen yourself and prepare yourself for that event. Or maybe you're not preparing for that at all, but you're just trying to prepare your body to be as healthy as it can be for a lot of years to come. But there are things that we should also be doing in practice, in shooting practice or training, that help prepare us for the test or for the quiz. Another form of a test would be actually having to use my gun in defense, right? That's for sure a test. It's a very high stakes version of a test. But nonetheless, if that's what I have to do today, there's going to be certain skills involved that I have hopefully developed to be able to excel at that test, right? To pass that test, to go home all in one piece without any extra holes or injuries to myself. Whatever the cost of that is on the other side, I mean, it is what it is, as long as I've used good, sane, moral, prudent, lawful use of force. But yeah, so drills aren't everything, and I think a lot of people use drills as a substitute for training, but it should be more in depth than that. It should be more comprehensive than that, actually. So that's why I brought up the whole thing of there's drills and there's exercises. And I just lump into exercises anything that we are doing that develops skill, but it's maybe not necessarily a drill. So let me give you an example of an exercise versus a drill. So at one point in my class, uh, in a pistol intelligence class, we talk about grip. Okay, and we talk about a couple different principles of grip, different things you should be doing grip wise. Okay, and I'm not a big believer in teaching a specific technique. Oh, it looks like we have Brian coming back. So I'll finish this thought, and then we'll get him back in here. Um, so I'm not real big on teaching a specific techniques, but teaching principles that multiple techniques that are valid, work within. Okay, so we get done to having that conversation of, okay, this is grip. Here's the principles of grip. So whatever your specific technique is, it should be you should have good you should have a good fulcrum on the gun, meaning you have that gun, or you have your hand high up on the grip of the gun. You should have good leverage on the gun. Okay, so talking about if you got a good high fulcrum, where am I applying leverage? How am I applying that leverage? Where are my fingers at? Where's the pressures being applied? Third, grip contact. So how much contact am I maximizing on the actual grip itself? Okay, those are three principles of grip. And so then what we do after we've had that discussion and discuss different ways of getting that done, as far as those different principles, then students I turn them loose to then basically fire. I typically have them fire 5-shot strings at that point. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why 5? Because that's usually what happens is after about 3 shots, sometimes 4, if there's a problem with grip, we start to see it break down around that point. So I want to encourage them to fire 5-shot strings, because then we're going to basically test their grip, what they're currently doing. And they're going to do that. They're going to fire a 5-shot string. Maybe they do it twice, and then they're going to make a change or a tweak to their grip technique. Okay. So, and that may be based off of what I explained in the lecture portion of that particular section of the class. Okay, let's try this now. Let's now change, the positioning of this hand, or let's, whatever. Okay. And then the whole point of all this is to be, while they're firing these 5-shot strings and they're making these little adjustments and tweaks to their grip, they're watching their sights of the gun as best they can, because on the one hand, you may see a whole bunch of chaos in what the gun is doing, and actually, like, if you're like, I have no idea what's going on here because it's all over the place. Well, that's a sign that the grip is not working. Okay. Meanwhile, they make a little tweak somewhere, and all of a sudden things start to settle down a little bit or become more predictable. Then that's a sign that, ooh, that's working, right? And that's what we're working towards, is playing with different techniques to then show us what works and what doesn't, and what tells us what works and what doesn't. When the gun starts behaving more consistently, more predictably in its patterns, meaning ideally we want to just see up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down as it recoils back and forth, right? And if that's predictable and consistent, then it tells us what we're doing with the grip is starting to work. So that's an example of a shooting exercise that helps us discover technique that works for us, and and it's very experimental and exploratory in nature. All right, let's get Brian back on here. Yo, dude. Oh, we don't have any audio.
There we go.
There we go.
Got to click the button.
Well, we're glad you made it back. I guess you have your internet working again.
Yep. Somehow it went down. I had to go reset the old router and get that all squared away. So yeah, fun with technology.
It happens. Well, we're glad you're back regardless. I didn't want to have to carry this on entirely by myself.
Yeah. All right. Where we at?
So I just shared some thoughts on drills versus exercises, but I'd kind of thrown it at you a moment ago, before, as we lost you, to hear your thought on sort of how I explain drills versus exercises and sort of the definitions I attached to those. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was one of the questions that I was thinking to you is what is the purpose for running these drills? Like, why should a student pick up a set of drills and start running them? And I think a lot of it comes down to something that you had said makes a lot of sense to me, is the transitioning between targets and being able to maneuver your gun around the target instead of just shooting flat. Is that right?
Yeah. So yes, like I just was explaining, like I will take a consistent, predictably behaving gun, okay, where it recoils consistently and predictably, as opposed to that it's just shooting flat, right?
Hmm.
Although flat's great, flat's nice. Flat looks awesome, especially for the grams. But yeah, we're looking for consistency in the behavior of the gun. It helps us shoot better for sure.
So you're incorporating not only movement of the gun, but movement of yourself as well. Like a lot of these drills incorporate moving back and forth. Yes.
Well, okay, so those are different objectives, right? Like on the one hand, what the example I was like where I was speaking from was purely from a running the gun perspective. Like I'm trying to learn how to shoot the gun well, and part of that is getting the gun to behave in my hands consistently, repeatedly, right? Now, me moving, that's something else entirely, right? Like that's a different objective. And movement should absolutely be something that's practiced. And it changes things for sure. So and that's the thing too, is like, so talking about drills versus training exercises, for instance, like we can, like there are drills that exist that, and in fact, I would argue that most drills that we see, shooting drills, are actually fairly complex in nature, or they're at least they're combining a number of skills into one drill, right? So, like one example would be the El Presidente that we started off by mentioning earlier. That one is, although the movement's minimal, it's still movement. Like you are turning and you're drawing, right? So, like that's more complex than if you were just standing there and you just initiated a draw, right? So, but in the course of an El Presidente, like how many different like gross skills. I don't know if this is the right way to say this, but because we could break it down into even smaller chunks and pieces, but like how many like chunked skills exist in a drill like the El Presidente? Well, there's a turn and draw. Okay, so there's some movement involved. We're turning our body. Okay, that means a reorientation of ourselves to targets and visually, of course, picking up targets. So there's a
Visually,
turn,
sure.
there's a draw. Okay, then there's shooting, but it's not on just one target. It's multiple targets. So now we have transitions that are involved. Oh, and wait, we got a reload involved. Oh, and then we go back to more shooting with more transitions, right? So like you see, there's a lot going on in El Presidente, right?
Yeah.
Versus a Mozambique that I also gave it as an example is 3 rounds, but even that is a combination of some things in that yes, you're static, but you draw and you fire 2 rounds to the body, but then you transition to the head. So there's a transition involved, and that head target's a smaller one than the body, target. So that's involved too, which is what we would call throttle control, meaning or changing the gears. We go from big, more generous target to something that's more, that's smaller and less forgiving, or a higher risk shot. And so even that's fairly complex. Like the most and not nearly as complex as El Presidente, obviously, but you see what I'm getting at? Whereas I
Yeah.
can create exercises, like shooting exercises that are a lot more focused on a specific thing, like that target a very specific, skill or something like that. So
Like
for
recoil
instance,
management or trigger control or something like that. Whereas a drill would be combining all of those exercises into a single movement in a
right,
way, right? Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's a good way of
Good. That makes sense
uh,
to me.
yeah,
Because I think a lot of what comes down to it is the repetition of the actions, doing a thing over and over and over again. So it becomes, you put less thought into a thing. The more that you can do that, the more you can problem solve when you're in a really tense situation. So I think that's, one of the essential benefits of having a training routine is that it limits you. If you have to sit here and look at your weapon and try to remember how to reload, your eyes are not up and paying attention to where the threat is and where the bad guys are, where the targets are. So you have to be able to do those things completely, you know, blind in a way. I don't pay attention. I assume that you don't probably look your mags into your gun either. But if you had to do that, that limits your ability to problem solve in this very dynamic, tense situation. So essentially, that I think that's one of the primary benefits of running these types of drills.
So, so I actually do look when I reload. Here's. Let me share with you my perspective on that. Actually, I believe in purposefully looking at the next important thing or the next important task. Um, and there's a reason for that. So now I will say this: if you develop skill to a high degree, um, like if you have a high degree of skill with a particular thing, let's just use the reload as an example. Okay, um, you will be able to do that looking or not, most likely than not, right? Like you'll be at a high, like for instance, okay, sorry, I'm trying to think how to explain this the best. I at one time was like you, Brian, where I was like, because this is how I was taught, this is how I was trained. I was like, how don't you dare look down at that gun. You got to keep your eyes up, keep situational awareness, right?
Hmm.
Very, very. I mean, that's a valid argument. But then, have you ever fumbled a reload?
Sure.
Yep. So have I.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, Here's what I can promise you: you have a higher degree or a higher probability of fumbling a reload if you don't look at that precise moment that you're inserting the mag into the gun. And so it's like, okay, all right, that's probably true. That's probably true. Um, what's the downside of looking at my mag well as I'm completing that reload? Oh, I'm losing my situational awareness. However, um, I don't think that's necessarily true either. Maybe it can be true, but I would say this. I would say that the amount of time that my eyes actually look here at the mag or at the mag well is like it's not even a second. It's probably like not even a half second. It's probably like a quarter second where just for that specific moment in time that as this mag comes up, I go boom. And then as soon as that's in, guess where my eyes are back up on the target. Okay. And so like the amount of time that you're doing that's very, very minimal. And so in that amount of time, you're probably not missing out on a whole lot. And then you're also ensuring that you're getting the task done successfully because you're more likely to succeed in doing that when your eyes are purposefully looking at the next most important thing. We aim our gun when we fire our shots with our eyes. Guess what inserting a mag into a gun is? It's also a form of aiming. I'm trying to take this and I'm trying to aim it into this opening on the grip of the gun. So for maximum success, I want to look there, and it doesn't need to be for very long at all. What we don't want to see are shooters, Brian, where they're doing this and they're like, "Oh, I got to reload," and then immediately they look down like this and they spend 2 seconds doing that. Like that's not ideal, and it's also not necessary. It's also not purposeful, right? So what's purposeful about what I described that I do? You're here on the target. You're initiating reload. You're still on target, and then as this hand is coming up, you're like, for just a split second, just for that moment in time that you need to help get that mag in the hole. And then as soon as that's in, you're like back up. That's purposeful. Okay, and I think it maximizes success in the reload with minimal downside of anything else. Um, so anyway, that's what
Well,
I do. And that
well,
and
given or take the my point was more about like how the less you have to spend on thinking about the details of the
mhm,
movements because you've practiced them so many
mhm.
times, the more able you are to have your brain in the fight, essentially.
Yes,
Because you're not so focused
yeah.
on each and every one of these actions, like how does my gun work or how do I shoot this gun?
Mhm.
Because you've already done it so many times that that's not what you're thinking about. You're thinking about the problem
Yep.
and how to solve it.
Yeah, and I also understood that's where you were going with your comments. But since
Hmm.
you had mentioned a specific example, and like you probably do that too, I was like, well, not exactly, which is okay. And we can totally do things differently in this respect. So to your point, though, I agree because what I've learned with myself is all the practice that I've done, which has come from doing a whole bunch of exercises, if you will, over the years with a whole bunch of different manipulations. I can choose if I want to do all those manipulations and never look at the gun. and it can do it without thinking. Yes.
Mhm.
um, and I'm sure you can too. And so that's a beauty of developing skill, right? Is you develop skill. Like, you have to understand, the way we acquire skill is, first we have to be very deliberate about what we're practicing. We have to kind of go step by step, right? To a large extent, it's like, well, first I do this, and then I do that, and then I do this, and then I do that. You have to get those kind of order of operations set in place and to do them correctly. Um, or else you'll fumble it up, right? And that's part of, like, you just don't, you're developing skill. That's what you have to do. You sort of have to sequentially walk your way through that, and then eventually that becomes more natural and more fluid with because of repetitions, which starts creating those neural pathways in the brain that are like, yes, we do this, then this, then this, and this, and it starts going. Instead of having to think through things step by step by step, you start to think of things as just simply a it's just like a routine that just, I mean, like, you begin the, step one of that routine. It's the same thing as finishing step four of that routine. Like, it's all one and the same. Just like when we are learning to drive our cars at first, when we're brand new drivers, we're just getting trained, we're like, we're trying to think through all these steps. It's like, oh, I'm approaching a corner. I need to make a turn. What do I need to do? Oh, I need to hit my turn signal. So I turn my turn signal on, right? And they're like, oh, but I'm still going too fast. So then you move your foot from the gas pedal over to the brake pedal and you start applying some pressure there, you know. And then you get closer to the corner, and at some point you want to let off that gas or off that brake, because you don't want to keep braking or you're going to come to a stop, right? Because you want to
Mhm.
fluidly move through the corner. Oh, and now it's time to start turning the wheel. How much do I turn the wheel? Oh, I don't know. You start turning, you're like, ooh, that's too much. Like, there's all this stuff that's going on that, when you're brand new to it, is so complex and even confusing. But
Right.
you have to kind of like step your way through that sequentially first, until you get it down enough to where it can start becoming a little bit more, to happen more as a routine. And then you want to get that to a place where it goes into your subconscious, and then it just, you don't even think about all the individual steps. You go, hey, I need to turn vehicle and go here now, and you just do it, and you do all that on your own. You're just like running a line of code in a software program.
Mhm.
Execute code, poof, and then it just runs. Like, you just run that program, right? And same thing with the gun. It's like you're running the gun, you're firing shots, and all of a sudden, gun's no longer firing shots. It's like, oh, what's going on here, right? Am I out? I need to reload. Is it a malfunction, right? So, hopefully, automatically, subconsciously, you diagnose what the problem is, and then execute that next line of code again without really much thought, just like what you were saying, because we want to be more thinking about bigger problems. And the bigger problems are, what's the tactical situation require here? What's going on? Where's my threat? What are they trying to do?
Right.
How can I counter ambush them, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think by getting into the repetition of it, I think that's what's always really helped me. The step-by-step process of like this step, then this step, then this step really helped me to kind of lock down the correct way to do things and to make sure that every single time that I tried to do that drill, that I would do it exactly right every single time all the way through. And I don't know if this is a good way to do it, but what I would do for myself was that every time I'd see myself, or maybe I would be working on my holster draw, every time I would go to draw and I didn't get a perfect combat grip on that pistol before I drew, then I would reset, come back to center, focus again on what my first action was going to be, and make every movement really, really count. And I would do that very slowly, and then once I got it all the way through perfectly, every action was all the way perfect, then I would start do it again and again, and then start
Mhm.
speeding it up until eventually I would, start hitting some, some decent times that way. How do
Yeah.
you go about your drills?
Yeah. Well, you're kind of touching on it, and even in talking about how to learn, let's just use the draw as an example, right? Like, the draw is one of the most basic fundamental skills that we as self-defenders, concealed carriers, must possess, because if you have a problem that requires a gun, um, you you need a gun in your hand. How do you get a gun in your hand? You draw it, more than likely, right? So, that and that's actually a surprisingly complex skill, because chances are you're wearing the gun. I mean, that's an ideal world. You have the gun somewhere on your person, right? Um, where is that? Okay. Well, for me, it's in the appendix, like 1 o'clock position on my body, right on my waistband. So I've got to get a hand to that gun. Oh, but wait, I have a shirt in the way. Okay, so shirt's got to come out of the way. So I'm clearing a garment out of the way, and now my hand is able to access the gun, but it's got to get there consistently, right? Like just those two things alone, clear garment, get hand on gun, like that's actually fairly complex. It takes a
Hmm.
fair bit of practice just to be able to do that consistently, repeatedly. And then, okay, hands on gun. Is that grip established exactly the way it needs to be? I don't know. Do I even know what a good grip feels like? Okay, so now we need to actually learn grip, proper grip of a handgun, how to establish that, what that should feel like. It should have certain index points, if you will, of trigger guard touches this finger here, back corner of the frame touches my thumb here. I feel pressure from the back strap here. Like there's all these things that I can use as clues to go, yes, my thumb is, or my hand is where it needs to be on the gun. And so, okay, I got to learn that so that I get a consistent grip every time. Okay, cool. Now we've got that figured out. Now, okay, I come out of the holster. How do I do that? And how do I do that safely? Because have you ever seen somebody draw from a holster and as they're pulling out of the holster, the gun is still like oriented towards their body?
Hmm.
I have. I've seen it.
Yep.
Have you ever seen someone draw out of a holster and their finger goes inside the trigger guard as soon as it clears holster?
Yep.
I've seen that. Guess what? Those are also learned skills too. So we have to learn that when I go to the gun in the holster and it comes out, my finger's got to remain straight. And I got to make sure I draw up in a certain way that I clear holster, but I'm not muzzling myself unnecessarily, right? So there's that, right? And now we get to a point, guns clear of holster. I got to get my support hand on there ideally, or else I'm shooting one handed, which is not ideal, but it can be done. And should you learn how to do that? Sure. Yes, you should learn how to shoot one handed. But now, okay, support hand on the gun. Okay, how do we do that? Where does that go? Are there index points I want to be making sure or that I'm paying attention to as far as like, is my support hand where it needs to be so that it's done consistently the same way every time? Cool. We get that figured out. And then finally, from here to my target, how do I get there and do that consistently so that my sights appear on target or my red dot appears on target, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? See
Hmm.
what I'm getting at? Like that's just talking about the draw, right? We haven't even fired a shot yet. So you see how much complexity is going on there just in something as simple as the draw, but yet it's like the most basic fundamental skill that we as concealed carriers should possess, or we don't have the ability of putting the gun in our hand to solve a problem that maybe requires a gun.
Do
So
do you
go ahead.
remember the martial art where it's just drawing the sword? Isn't there? I'm pretty sure there's a martial art form that is centered around a samurai just getting his sword
Yeah.
out of the sheath
Yes,
in
that
in the
that
most
that rings a
efficient way
bell. I
possible.
don't know what it's called, but that rings a
Yeah.
bell. Yeah,
So it sounds similar, and like what you're talking about, the complexity. You see something like John Wick, and you're just, like, he just runs around with that gun. But there's a lot of stuff that goes into every tiny manipulation of that weapon to make those bullets go where you want them to go in a manner that's safe to you and the people that you love around you.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I explained all of this, and you even touched on it as well. There's the answer lies within that explanation, as far as like, well, how do you do this? How do you learn this? Where do you start? Um, so, are you familiar with the concept of a micro drill?
No.
Okay, so a micro drill is you basically taking a drill. So let's say draw and fire one shot on target. Okay, it's very simple, right? Okay,
Hmm.
let's do and hey, let's use a shot timer while we're at it, so we can actually measure our time. So because measuring stuff is good because it without measuring and knowing if we're doing good or not, it's hard to know if we're doing good or not. So all right, on the beep, beep, draw. Okay, fire one shot. Bam. All right, cool. Well, a micro drill would be to that's an example of one complete drill, one very simple complete drill. But I already explained that it's simple, but it doesn't mean that there's not a lot going on just in the course of a draw. So a micro drill would be to break that drill down into little chunks. Okay, so all those little steps I just described, those can all be micro drills by themselves. So, for instance, uh, one of the things I do actually pretty like I've done it already in this episode, Brian. I'm not going to draw out my pistol because it's loaded, it's hot. I'm sitting here on camera with you. I'm also mildly distracted, so I'm not going to do anything like that. even though I technically could have, I've got a relatively safe direction in this direction here, especially if I kept it oriented at the floor. But a micro drill would be clear garment, hand on gun, and make sure that I'm indexing my firing hand on the gun in the proper grip, in my so-called master grip or whatever you want to call it. And then I could just stop there and then reset everything and repeat. Okay, go again. Clear garment, hand on gun. Okay, repeat. Clear garment, hand on gun. And that's a micro drill. I'm and that's actually a couple of things going on there. If that's too much, let's just figure out how can I consistently get my cover garment, my concealment garment out of the way. And I can micro drill that. Okay, that seems to work pretty good. Okay, now let's just focus on getting that grip established on the gun in the holster. Okay, however you think you need to do it, to break that up into little bite-sized chunks so that you can start putting that all together as part of that more complex thing. So those are all examples of micro drills. You can micro drill just from clearing the holster to getting your support hand on the gun. You can micro drill from first contact of support hand on gun to pointing at the target. And those are all things that I have done and I have practiced. Okay. But the thing with micro drills is like, and that's a form of sort of breaking it up into those little bite-sized steps. But at some point you want to put it all together, right? And so then you do that too. And with the micro drill repetitions combined with the complete drill repetitions, guess what's going to happen? You're going to start developing those automatic neural pathways, muscle memory, that leads you to being able to do that cleaner, more successfully, subconsciously, to where you don't have to think about it as much, and that becomes faster and more efficient and more fluid. Okay, does that make sense? So
Yep.
that's when you ask questions like, guess what? That's where I would start with such things. I mean, it's okay to start with, okay, where's my baseline currently of I'm going to go ahead and try to draw my gun. Ooh, that did not feel very good at all. Clearly, I have work to do. Then start at the basics and start breaking up into little bite-sized chunks, and then work on those chunks, and then put it all together, and do that repeatedly, day in, day out. And if you do that purposefully and intentionally, it actually probably doesn't take you as much time as what you think it will. The problem is most people fail in not actually doing those things consistently, repeatedly.
That's a good point. What do you think would be a good routine for a beginner shooter? Like, like how many times a week do you think they should work on these micro drills and drills?
Yeah. Well, I think we all have to take into account where we are at personally. I mean, we all have different things going on in our lives, different circumstances, and different accommodations that must be made. I am a big proponent, though, if possible, to do things daily, but to make it realistic in the daily context. Um, so can you find Brian? I'm going to ask you straight up, Brian. Like, be honest, because I already know the answer. Because the answer is pretty much true for everybody. Can you find in your current daily schedule? I'm going to go ahead and be a little more aggressive with this. Can you find 10 minutes in your day to do something productive with?
Sure.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Could you find 5 minutes? If you're like, yeah, 10 minutes, that's a little rough. Can you find 5 minutes in your day that you
I
could
can do
free
five
up and do
minutes.
something?
Sure. I can
Right?
do 5 minutes.
Right? We all waste more time sitting on the porcelain, throne, or scrolling TikTok or whatever. Like 5 minutes. Like, dude, like we could all find 5 minutes. Guess what? In 5 minutes, you can do a surprising amount of work just on the draw. Um, and if you did that every day, you would see progress in a matter of probably not even a week. Certainly within 2 weeks, and certainly within a month, you will be a very different skilled shooter, at least with respect. If we're just using the draw as an example, which again is a fundamental thing you should be able to do. If you're just trying to, like, you just want to improve on your draw of your gun from your concealment holster, if you did 5 minutes every day for 30 days, you'd be a totally different person after 30 days.
Hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
So,
The hard
what
part
kind
is
of
actually
drills?
doing that, every day.
Yeah, it's that playing the piano. It's if there's a thing that you want to get better at, you got to do it as much as possible. That's the only way you're going to get better at it. So, what
Yeah.
are some drills that you think some beginners could start with?
Yeah. It's a very valid question. Um, I'd actually like to hear some of your thoughts on that first, and then I'll provide my response.
Okay.
Yeah, let's hear
Well,
what you think. What are some good beginner level drills?
I think starting out, everything that I worked on was just the presentation of the weapon. Um, Getting that exactly perfect, I think, was really beneficial to me. And then after that came more of the trigger control and recoil management. A lot of my grip was a part of the presentation of the weapon. So that's a big part of understanding how to grip your weapon and why to grip it that way. So I think starting off with that, learn how to grip your weapon and how to get it out of the holster and out is your first essential movements that you need to be doing that. And we got to be making sure that we're doing this safe. I want to make sure, we're talking to our beginners out there, making sure we're removing all of the ammunition from our firearms and we're pointing our weapons in a safe direction and all these different things so that we're super safe. Get yourself a barrel block, make sure
Mhm.
you're doing things correctly, because you can make mistakes as an expert, because you're not paying so close attention. So starting off with that holster draw and presentation of the weapon, I think, is the first and primary thing that I would begin with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree with that. We kind of established that. In fact, so here would be some of my thoughts. Since we already covered, basically draw and presentation of the gun to say a target. Um, Here would be another thing. The number one thing that I see shooters struggle with is the inability to press the trigger without moving the gun. Okay, because it doesn't matter how much effort you put into aiming the gun, um, if you can't actually keep the gun where you're aiming it while you press the trigger, right? Um, so there's three things that got to happen to put a round on target where you intend to. Number one, you got to locate the target. Okay, and this is Brian Enos's terminology. Brian Enos, famous, maybe not as well known today, but was one of the top shooters in the country back in the 80s and then in the 90s. Wrote the book Practical Shooting Beyond Fundamentals. So number one, you got to locate the target. So that essentially means I got to get my eyes, if you will, on the target. Okay. Number two, I got to get the gun on target. That's what you just talked about, actually. Presentation. So drawing the gun or presenting it to target, like that's getting the gun on target. So our eye needs to already be on target for us to then be able to get the gun on target. Because how do we know the gun's on target if we don't actually, if we don't have our eye on the target? We got to recognize the moment, guns on target. Okay, cool. That also implies that maybe some aiming is involved, right? Actually, it should imply some aiming is involved. How refined that aim is, that's I guess up for debate, if you will. I mean, a closer, larger target doesn't require a lot of refinement in the aim. Obviously, a more difficult, further, smaller target is going to require more refinement. Okay, so locate the target, get the gun on target, aim the gun on target. The third thing that has to happen is we got to keep it all there while we press the trigger. That's the part that a lot of shooters end up screwing up, right? Because as they're pressing the trigger, you know, whether they sympathetically squeeze the rest of the hand or jerk the wrist downward or whatever, it's a very common thing, right? We see it happen very, very often. And so, one thing that I remember getting this from Rob Latham on the podcast, actually, a number of years ago now. It was actually, it might not have even been on the podcast. It might have been on one of our Guardian Nation lives that we used to do, um, that we do no longer. But so I remember Rob Latham talking about how one of the things that he's practiced over the years in dry fire was just learning how to press a trigger faster and faster and faster with less and less movement in the gun.
Mhm.
And to do that, he was like, you don't even have to have a target. You don't need to be aiming at anything. Like, you can just have it down here in your hand. You could be observing everything and just paying attention to the gun, your hand, if there's any other, unnecessary movement as you work the trigger. But basically, press the trigger and do it. And I think it's best if you do it in a rapid fashion, because it's going to reveal to you weaknesses in this process much more quickly. And so, basically snatch away to the trigger and see what happens. Oh, wow. Okay. It moved a bunch. Reset it. So in other words, work the slide, reset the trigger, or the sear or the hammer. Okay. Do it again. Bam. Okay. Okay. Reset. Click. Okay. Reset. Click. okay, reset, click, and just repeatedly learn how to press the trigger and just observe for movement in the gun as you're doing that, and try to um, make your grip pressures more and more neutral as you're pressing that trigger. So that's something that Rob Latham talked about. Like one of the things that he put a lot of emphasis in dry fire was just that very thing, something super simple. And it's all about just learning how to press a trigger, especially in a rapid fashion, because honestly, anybody can press a trigger relatively smoothly when we do it slow and careful. The harder part is doing it in a more rapid or accelerated fashion and not moving the rest of the hand. And so that's something I would encourage beginner level. Actually, it's something I would encourage anybody to work on. But certainly, if you're relatively new to this, you're just learning, just developing skill, learn how to press the trigger in a accelerated fashion without moving the gun. And you can do it just looking at it, down in front of your face. You can do it extended out and actually aiming at a target. If that's the case, you want to be looking very carefully at your sights and observing any movement in the either the dot or the iron sights as you're doing that. Okay, so that's the next thing. All right, so draw presentation, um, then learn how to press the trigger and not move the gun. Okay, that's going to help you actually shoot more accurately. Okay, so those are the first two things that exist in what I call my pistol intelligence standards. Number one is accuracy, my accuracy standard, which is I ask students in my class to shoot 5 rounds at a B8 bullseye target in 5 seconds or less. I could not have a time restraint, but I like having a time restraint just to have a little bit of pressure there. And they do that at 10 yards. 5 shots, 5 seconds, 10 yards in an NRA B8 scored for points. The 10 ring is 3.36 inches in diameter. So a little bit less than 4 inches. So you're basically asking them to shoot, where possible, if they want full points, into something a little bit less than 4 inch circle, 5 shots in 5 seconds at 10 yards.
Hmm.
And it's very doable. But to do that, you have to be able to consistently press and fire those shots without moving the gun. It's an accuracy challenge. Okay. Number two, the draw standard. They got to be able to draw and fire a shot. Actually, in my standards, we measure them on drawing and firing 2 shots. Why two? Because it keeps them honest and doesn't allow you to get away with anything. Because you can sometimes get away with a crappy grip on the draw and still snatch off a shot and get a good hit. But guess what? You won't get. You won't get a second one that's very good if your grip sucks, right?
Yeah.
So we draw and fire two and measure that, but it's all about testing the draw and how good we can do that consistently with the grip from the draw or from the holster. Okay. So then what I would then say is, once we've sorted out the draw and we've sorted out accurately being able to shoot, which a lot of that entails pressing the trigger without disturbing the alignment of the gun on target, then I get into recoil management. So how do we practice that? Well, it's harder to do in dry fire. So the recoil management piece is something that's really kind of necessary to practice in live fire. Okay. And all these things we should practice in live fire too, and we should be practicing in dry fire. But the thing that's hardest to practice in dry fire, because you basically need a gun that's actually cycling. So that implies we got to do it in live fire. That's recoil management. So that's something you got to learn. That's going to be a lot to do with grip. Okay. But as I mentioned earlier in the episode, which some of that was a monologue for me as we were waiting for you to get back from your internet woes, as I explained that what we're looking for is to make little grip technique tweaks and changes to get the gun to where it behaves in a consistent manner. Because if it behaves consistently, then we can work with that very well. Um,
That's where
yeah,
our accuracy comes from, is that
accuracy at
consistency.
speed. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, especially yes, it's one thing to be able to just take one well-aimed shot and take all the time in the world, but yes, accuracy at speed is going to be dictated by how consistently the gun behaves, because consistency means I can then run the gun in an accelerated fashion,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So,
that's one of the things I'm always trying to get across whenever I'm talking to somebody about, the repetition. It's getting that consistency, everything right every single time as you go through it. So that way your body remembers each one of those movements.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So, so I already kind of touched on and explained what some of what I would do as far as a shooting exercise that would help with that recoil management piece. That's what I referenced earlier in the episode when you were away. The fourth thing, and this is again based upon my pistol intelligence standards. The fourth one is transitions. Okay. What are transitions? Well, transitions are any time that we need to change the orientation of the gun as well as our eyes. Meaning, so we now have to change where we're aimed. Uh, and so, yeah, that's a transition, right? So we're looking at and shooting at, let's say, point A, and then we now need to transition over to point B. Okay, and fire a shot or fire multiple shots, whatever. Okay. Um, Now, is it true that there are contexts where I may have multiple threats to engage? Yes. Are those common? Not super common, because even though the statistics bear out that there's quite did I lose? Okay, lost connection there for myself for a brief moment there. It's
Whew.
not it's not super common that we have that it's not uncommon. Excuse me, it's not common that we have to actually shoot multiple assailants, because once we shoot one of them, it's pretty often that the rest of them are going to start dispersing. Okay. From what we see, we have a lot of video evidence of that very thing.
Unless you're really fast on those transitions.
Right. But yes, I mean, so we only want to shoot when, there's a threat present. And that's true of
Sure.
one assailant or multiple assailants. But here's where it is very relevant, the skill of being able to essentially move my eye and the gun from point A to point B to point C to point D, even with a single assailant. Um, if they're moving, guess what? Every shot is in a different spot, right? If I got to shoot an assailant multiple times, which that may absolutely be necessary, and they are not moving, which that's not uncommon, okay, then every time I fire, each succeeding shot is going to be in a new location. Those are all transitions as well, even though it's on a single perp, okay, on a single bad guy. If that bad guy's moving, it's as if I'm shooting multiple bad guys, right? Because it was here, but now it's here, but now it's here, and now it's there because he's moving and I'm, following, right? At least that's the idea. So the idea of learning and practicing transitions is also key. How would you go about practicing that? Well, do it. Okay. But you got to learn how to do it. And that can be micro drilled. So one thing is actually just practicing the act of getting my eye from point A to point B and back from point B to point A and A to B or B to C or D or C to D or whatever. Okay. Because like that's one thing. You got to actually be able to get your eye effectively from one point to another point. Then let's put that together with moving the gun with it. Okay. And ideally, the eye is going to lead the gun just a little bit, just by a hair, because we're going to be on point A, target A, let's say. And when I decide I got to go to target B, the eye's going to get there a little bit before the gun. At least it should. Okay. And so ideally, we don't have the gun dragging way behind, and we don't necessarily want to move the gun with the eye, because chances are that means that we're actually not moving the eye as efficiently as it could be, and we'll tend to over transition because we can't quite get the eye and the gun stopped at the same time very well. If we move the eye to the next target and bring the gun to it, then that usually means that we can get a little bit more of a precise stop on that
Hmm.
next location. Okay, because the eye is essentially telling the gun where to go. So, anyway, transitions. That's something I would encourage people to learn to practice, and you can micro drill that and full on drill that in dry fire, but also especially in live fire. If your range doesn't allow you to set up multiple targets, you can still get, like, you can use our pistol IQ targets that we sell at concealedcarry.com, and those have like multiple different target zones on them. Okay, and so you can still practice transitions around, from target to target to target. You can just hang that single sheet of paper at your local indoor range, let's say, and you can practice transitions from from all the different targets to other different targets. And then the final piece is throttle control, I think is an essential skill, which usually also implies that there's a transition involved, but also means now that we're probably transitioning between close to far target or far to close target or something in
Hmm.
between. And that's kind of its own skill, because you have to learn how much sight refinement do I need to see for a close target versus a far target, or a small target versus a big target. Okay, and that's kind of its own thing as well. So those are what I identify as sort of my core five shooting skills, Brian.
Hmm.
Is one, accuracy; two, draw; three, recoil management; four, transitions; five, throttle control. And that's very shooting specific. We're not even talking tactics or movement of our bodies here. But you asked about beginners, and that's where I think beginners ought to start. And I think you want to have those five things pretty well sorted out before you actually even start incorporating movement and things like that. Because what I see, one of the failures I see, Brian, is, and this is true of trainers, of instructors that put students through classes, that it's like, hey, they're going through these, pretty dynamic, tactical oriented classes, but the shooting fundamentals still aren't even there. Well, how
Hmm.
much better you think their fundamentals are getting when you're throwing all this other stuff at them too? It's not, their fundamentals are not, their shooting skills not improving. Like, we have to, we, I believe we want to hone the, it's not like we all have to become professional level, master class level, shooters before we can move on to the next thing. But we need to have some reasonable skill level that's somewhat automated before we start doing, I think, the tactics piece, if we want to get maximum, growth and learning from it.
Well, the tactics is this problem solving phase.
Right.
Learning how to run your gun is learning how to use your tool. I think
Yep.
that's the key to that.
Yep.
So, where do you think people can go to find more information about drills and these type of training and exercises?
So actually, I think you should go check out the Pistol Intelligence online course. Like, I was just like, you know what, that would be a good place to learn more about this stuff, because you'll see how I introduce those drills and exercises in the 2-day class that I teach, which, like, 75% or so of it is filmed and included in that online video course. You can find it on our website, concealedcarry.com. You can find it in Guardian University, which is our online video training library, kind of a repository of all kinds of training content and videos. Guardian Nation members get access to it for free. You can also just buy the course. I think that's probably what I would recommend, Brian.
Hmm.
What do
Agreed.
you think?
No, I agree. That was the first thing that popped in my head. We have so many videos up there of stuff that we've already shot, of footage and courses, all on very basic stuff that you can do from your home. I think one of the benefits of learning a new skill is watching somebody do it, and being able to observe how they move their body, and then listening to them explain why they move their body that way is essential. So, having
Mhm.
that video representation is one of those key things, especially if you can't show up at a personal class. Obviously, that would be much better, get that in-person instruction. But the next best thing is going to be obviously video, so that you can kind of copy and
Yep.
observe, those actions as you see someone who's
Yep.
skilled at it.
Yeah. And if people want to train with me in person, they can go to rileybowman.com and see my full training calendar there. And of course, you can come to the Guardian Conference in September, September 20th to 22nd, later this year in Oklahoma City. Guardianconference.com for that, for information and for tickets, which are available. You can find a local instructor to you that is good and that's qualified and that can help you learn these things. And that is, I mean, in-person training is always encouraged. Um, you can check our in-person instructor network. You can hopefully find somebody relatively close to you, if not in your immediate town, by going to class.concealedcarry.com. And we've actually spent quite a bit of, we've made quite a bit of investment into that website, to make it easy to search and find and locate classes in your area or close to you. A lot of the classes on there are going to be concealed carry classes. Some of those involve live fire and some do not. And there are also other classes that are just shooting oriented classes
They have
on
a medical class on there too.
class.concealedcarry.com. Yeah, Brian's teaching classes. So, yep, absolutely. So those are some resources for sure. Anything else?
Hmm. I think YouTube is a great option. I mean, you got to be kind of careful who you're getting that information from. But
Hmm.
there's a lot of people out there who are very accomplished shooters who talk about um, all of the things that you need to
Hmm.
know about. Just type in
Yeah.
the basics of handgun shooting, and you will get a plethora of very highly skilled and competent people who will show you everything that they know about it. So I think that's a
Yep.
great resource too.
Yeah, and I'm going to mention one specific YouTube channel, friend of mine that you folks can check out, and he has a lot of really good videos about this stuff, about shooting, about skill development. That'd be Tim Heron shooting. Tim Heron, Herron, Tim Heron Shooting, his YouTube channel. He's got a lot of great free content available there. Also, my friend Matt Little, Graybeard Actual, I think is his actual YouTube channel. Graybeard Actual has some great content on there as well. Trying to think, there are others for sure, but those are two friends. So obviously, I'm gonna give them a shout out, and they put up some really good content. Um, are there any others that come to your mind?
Man, not off the top of my head, man. I think every big gun
Ooh,
person on the internet's got a course on it.
right. I was just thinking the Active Self Protection Extra channel.
Hmm.
A lot of really good training content on that one as well. And of course, there's a concealed carry YouTube channel. We've got some content on there that's not behind the paywall, if you will, of Guardian University on our website. So you can find our concealed carry YouTube channel as well, and you'll find some content too. So yes, there's some resources for you for sure. Cool. Also, there's some great books. Okay, so I mentioned one earlier, Practical Shooting Beyond Fundamentals by Brian Enos. Really great book. There's dry fire books from the likes of Steve Anderson. Those are a great place to get started for as well for a number of people. Um, uh, let's see, there's some books from guys like Ben Steger and Joel Park that are pretty good. Um, what else? Oh, and also podcasts that you can listen to besides ours. Okay, we try to help you out here, of course, but Steve Anderson has a podcast called That Shooting Show. It's pretty excellent as far as talking about some many of these same sorts of things, getting started, training, etc., dry firing, etc. Okay, so anyway, lots of resources. Hope that's helpful for you all, and I think we're out of time for this episode here today. Brian, anything else though that we didn't cover that you want to throw out as we start to wrap this up?
I don't think so. I think I was racked my brain for all the things that are in my head for helping those new shooters out there, and I think we covered a good chunk of it.
Awesome. Agreed. Well, folks, don't forget our sponsors of today's episode were ccwsafe.com and also HK or hk-usa.com. Thank you to those sponsors of ours for making what we do possible. Please consider supporting them, and because in doing so supports us. Folks sometimes like to know, like, what can we do to help, to support you guys? Well, support our sponsors, and and of course, support. You can support us directly. Concealedcarry.com is the place to buy if you want to buy product or training gear or training videos or whatever. That's the place. So you can find all the things, including all of our brands: Mountain Man Medical, KSG Armory Holsters, Barrel Block, Range Tech Shot Timers, etc. All on concealedcarry.com. So there you go. If you want to hit us up, let us know what's going on in your life. You got a question for us, you want to give us feedback on the podcast, you can do that by emailing us at podcast@concealedcarry.com. And so with that, we're going to sign on out of here, leave you for your weekend here as it is Friday for us where we're recording this. Have a lovely weekend. Have a great week next week. We'll be back with more podcast content. And until then, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true.